One, two, three, four. I can't. Not only can I not remember what that song is, I can't remember if I hate it or not. I'm pretty sure I do. If history has taught me anything, if history has taught me anything, it's that when my hair gets this long, I permanently wear a hat because it's just too ridiculous. Even if I comb it, it still just looks like I look like a teacher who lost tenure unexpectedly. Actually, pretty close to the truth. Hi. No, it's not at all. So I'm still very much behind. I want to say 5 weeks. I did like the last time it got this high, the giant stack that you can't see goes to the ceiling. It's ridiculous. Um, it took me I think a little less time, but I'm also not home as often anymore. So I spend half the week in county jail. It's a whole thing. I don't want to talk about it, but yeah, I've gotten some pretty good reading in, but I'm still not caught up to the point where anything like Sins of Sinister came out this week, which I believe was my pick for the week for the shop, and that is Sins of Sinister is the first X event of the year. It's going to be like a smaller one, I feel like, but I'm always into it. But I'm so far behind that. So we'll just have to make do with these, won't we? First up, Magic Order Volume 4, Number 1. What can I say about this book that I haven't already said just within a few months ago? Shit. It almost feels like a few weeks ago. It could very well be. I don't know. My sense of time is completely screwed at this point, but um, I never, this is my favorite Mark Millar book, probably of all time. And he's written some duds. There was it seems like, I want to say like every fourth or fifth title that he writes, it just stinks. And I mean, you can't have, very few people could possibly deliver that often. Millar is very prolific, but he also is apparently a bit of a hack from what I've heard. And I think that's just, that's rumor though. I don't want to go on that. But, and I believe I've said this before, I keep expecting this show to start. I'm very curious to see what that's like. This was the first IP that Netflix, I don't know if they own it, but Millar and Netflix made a deal a few years back, and Magic Order was going to be the first. It was the first thing optioned, I guess. The first thing that they published, that Netflix and Image, I believe, published in tandem, co-production. They made the Jupiter's Legacy show, which apparently got canceled. Like, I think it got canceled that week, and I think that's it. I don't know if there's other. To be honest with you, most, like, I haven't even watched all the Marvel properties, and that's my favorite publisher. I haven't watched Jupiter's Legacy. I haven't watched Umbrella Academy. I didn't even fucking read Umbrella Academy. I'm not. Look, man, I've read some of his stuff, and he's a pretty decent writer, and he's clearly a big comic book nerd. I am not reading comics by a guy in fucking My Chemical Romance. Get the fuck out of here. I would read a comic by a guy in fucking EMF before I would do that. So, ooh, that was a pretty good pull for them. Anyway, fun book. Magician Sopranos. And I mean, what more do you need to say? Also, this week, this is kind of a fudge, but Justice Society of America 1 and 2. This actually, number 1 came out, I want to say, in December, oddly enough, because this just came out this week. I'm not sure what the reboot here is. My current DC reading is at pretty much a nadir. I haven't been following any regular DC titles for a very long time. I think since Bendis came over and started writing Superman, and even then I was buying those in trade. As I'm sure I've mentioned on every single date I've been on, I'm much more of a Marvel guy than a DC guy. But there are definitely times where I read more DC. And now though is like I have not read DC in fucking forever. I don't know if it was Rebirth. I think it had a lot to do with the fact that that I quit working at the old shop back in 2018, and so I had to cut a lot of stuff that I was getting regularly, and pretty much all of DC was out the door at me. I was like, well, I can wait on that shit. And then during in 2020, I did read a lot of that stuff that I had missed out on the previous couple of years, a year and a half maybe. And then yeah, when I started working this job, I mean, I buy more now. A new Human Target came out. Human Target is one of my favorite characters. DC has some of my absolute favorite characters of all time. I just find their general universe building, I'm not that interested. So there's like, I mean, and the big Dark Crisis on Infinite Earths event, which I think is just wrapping up, I believe is starting a lot of things over. Not like a hard reboot like the original Crisis, but then again, it could very well be. Interesting fun fact: Dark Crisis on Infinite Earths, written by Joshua Williamson, and I think I have mentioned this before. I knew Josh back when he was just a regular at my old comic book store in San Diego, and he's pretty hot shit, and he has been for a little while now. I remember when like his first few books were getting published over at Image. He was real nervous about pitching and stuff like that, and I was like, "Yeah, you'll be fine." And then he moved to Portland, and then he pretty much took off from there. I think I saw him at Comic Con in San Diego like the following year, but I don't think I've seen him or talked to him since he's kind of hit it big. I couldn't be happier for him though. I think he's a great writer, and I mean, I wish he would do more Marvel stuff. He did do an Illuminati series for Marvel that was, clearly going to get the chop a year in, and but it was still really good. Um, Especially considering that we used to all think he was a big pain in the ass. Where the way it worked at my old shop was the books would come in Wednesday morning, usually around 9, and we would start breaking them down and getting them counted and start to do the polls and everything else, the preview orders, and it usually took us until like 12 or 1. So we opened at 10:30. So like there was always kind of a gap, a couple hours where we were trying to get things done, and the last thing we wanted were paying fucking customers. And Williamson would line up every morning around 10:15, just hover there, and we were all like, "Dude, will you just get the fuck out of here? Just come back in an hour or two. Jesus Christ, let us finish." But then, got to chatting with him. He's actually a pretty cool guy. I mean, the fact that he showed up that early was still a pain in the ass, but as time went on, I minded less, certainly. This is written by Jeff Johns, so it's nothing to do with Josh Williamson. Oh, I brought that all up because Williamson, yeah, like I say, he's a tentpole writer now at DC. That's a term that I think I came up with. I don't. Maybe I heard it somewhere, but he's an architect now at DC. He's kind of setting the stage, and it's kind of a drag that I don't read him. I mean, I guess now would be the time, but I don't give a shit. DC. My favorite parts about DC are the kind of more not obscure necessarily. Justice Society, if you're unfamiliar, I guess I should. I don't have to, but I should. Um, Justice Society was begun in the early 40s. I want to say 1940, 41, and it was. I don't know who created the Justice Society originally, but it was the first super team, and so it was Superman and Batman. But then it was like Flash and Green Lantern, but the Golden Age one. You had your Jay Garrick and your Alan Scott, and I don't remember who, and a lot of other heroes that never, a lot of other superheroes that didn't come back in the Silver Age, at least not right away. You had the new Flash and the new Green Lantern in the Silver Age and stuff, and then that became the Justice League of America. So the Justice Society is on Earth 2. I think that's still the number for it, which was in DC lore is the Golden Age. DC doesn't, or it does now, but it never used to give a shit about world building, universe building. It was just like let's whatever. So ever since Crisis on Infinite Earths in '85, they've kind of had to do. They're like, oh, people want that because that's Marvel delivered that. So they started everything over, And I think that's what Dark Crisis on Infinite Earths. I mean, given the name, I would imagine, but they've done a few crises that haven't ended with a full reboot. They've only done three full reboots that I know: Crisis on Infinite Earths, New 52, and Rebirth, which was in 2016. So this is the new golden age on it. I don't know what that means. The great James Robinson really made a lot of hay out of the golden age characters. Is Starman that I talked about extensively, and he also wrote Justice Society Returns, which I haven't yet read. So any interest I have in the golden age Justice Society is largely due to him. But yeah, it's also written by Jeff Johns, who I've never been a huge fan of, but he's like another DC sort of tentpole writer. When he started writing Green Lantern around '05, I want to say maybe '04, maybe even earlier than that, people were losing their minds for it. So I picked it up. I didn't think it was that great. I've read other stuff that Jeff Johns has written that I enjoyed, but I don't know. But I'm not like worried to see his name on this Justice Society book. So I guess we'll find out next week. Sorry. All right. So there's last week's stuff. Do I want to get? No, I'll do it. First up, Barbaric Hell to Pay. #1, great book. I had forgotten how the last series ended, and which I believe was called Axe to Grind. But this takes place mostly in hell. Our main character, whose name eludes me right now, is in hell, and his friends are on their way to rescue him. And it's heavily implied at the end that he doesn't really need rescuing, which really fits in with the tone of the book overall. It's hilarious. It's violent. It's still as good as it's ever been. Immortal Sergeant #1. This was fun in that it is a it's kind of a trope of the cop about to retire, one more case, the one case he couldn't close. But the coolest thing about it is that Ken Niimura, yeah, has got a very cartoony style for this sort of hard bitten noir thing, and I think it makes a great sort of. I do find that like I have to wait until issue 2 to really be able to tell if it's going to be worth the rest of it, which is kind of a drag. But I mean, the West, just how comics are kind of written these days. And then finally, White Savior #1. Now I do, and I'm sure I've mentioned this. I don't like to. If I don't like something, I just kind of rather gloss over it. I guess I could just say that and leave it there. The premise is good. The premise is funny. You have um, young Asian American kid tired of hearing his grandpa's old stories about uh, the big dumb white savior that saved his village when he was a boy, and then our hero finds himself transported back into time at that to that village to meet this big dumb idiot who was apparently is now a legend, but at the time was a moron. I think it's a great premise. There's the dialogue. There's a certain like definitely when I was a kid, and also largely in the '60s and '70s. And we have Stan Lee to thank for it. Stan Lee really brought to comics a very fun and funny, very jokey. They were always super corny. I mean, Stan was just a big cornball, but it was definitely one of the big appeals of the Marvel universe back then, and it stuck around for a very long time. I want to say it was probably after the bottom fell out in the '90s that you started seeing creators kind of drift away from that. But I mean, it had been happening for a while, like with your Vertigo books and stuff. Well, shit. I mean, really, since the I'll start again. So Stan in the '60s kind of developed that. Roy Thomas kept it going into the '70s, and but by the '80s, then you started having more guys taking it seriously. So you had like Frank Miller's Daredevil and Batman. You had The Watchmen by Alan Moore and Dave Gibbons, stuff like that, where there was sex and violence and cursing, and it was all very serious and dramatic. And people went crazy for it because you'd never seen anything like that in comics before. And then I feel like there's definitely been not a backlash against that necessarily, but the sort of the traditional kind of cornball dialogue you'd find in superhero comics doesn't actually. No, now I'm thinking about it. No, it kind of stopped. Like I'm saying, in the '80s, it started getting a little more serious, but you still had, uh, you know, Spider-Man cracking wise and stuff like that. And then I want to say in like the early 2000s, when you had guys like Bendis just getting started, and Brian K. Vaughan and a lot of Brian's. In fact, I think they were all named Brian. Started getting away from that more and leaning more into ironic, sarcastic Gen X sort of a vibe, which I apologize on behalf of my generation. White Savior here is a real return to the very jokey sort of, I would say, like 80s sort of book. And nah, thanks anyway. When I read those comics now, I find them charming, cute. They're a throwback, but I don't want to read it so much. It's just they're all really bad jokes, and it's just a really I don't know. This is another thing that I've noticed. I notice it in movies more than anything, but it's always seemed to me that in the '70s, especially in like kind of B movies that I like, science fiction and horror movies, sarcasm. People became that's what it is. This book is fluent in sarcasm, and go fuck yourself. I cannot stand when people even use that word. I was in a writing class in college, and this guy in the class, very nice guy, um, terrible writer, and he had written a story that took place in a fast food restaurant, and he had clearly had experience working in one of those because I also have that, so I recognized it right away. And it was a very clerksy, Kevin Smithy, which I believe was like kind of his thing, as I recall. He was into that sort of thing. This would have been like '05, '06 maybe. And I remember somebody in the class, like during the discussion, was like, "What does this line mean?" And what they were asking was, "This sounds stupid," but he kind of misinterpreted it as like, and he goes, "It's just sarcasm," and I put a bullet right into my face right there in front of everybody. Very tragic in Dr. Luvas's writing class at San Diego State in the mid aughts. But frankly, I think it was the right decision, and I stand. So yeah, I don't want to harp on this any more than I have to. Plus, it's already been 18 minutes, so I'm gonna stop. Okay, see you next time. Bye.